I didn't notice it the first time, or the second, or the 10th. It took me years, embarrassingly, honestly, years, to understand what she had been doing every single time I walked through that door. Elena was my dad's best friend's wife. That's how I always categorized her. A relationship by extension. Someone who existed at the edges of my life because of a chain of connections that had nothing to do with me personally. Except, she always saved me a seat. Every dinner at their house. Every holiday gathering where the table was full and extra chairs were being dragged in from other rooms. Every casual Sunday afternoon where people settled wherever they could find space.
There was always a chair next to her, already pulled out, already waiting. I sat in it every time without thinking. The way you take a path that's already been cleared without stopping to ask who cleared it or why. I was 26 years old the night I finally understood. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, the birthday party carrying on loudly behind her. And she was crying. Not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself. Quietly. The way people cry when they've been holding something for so long that the body simply decides, without consulting anyone, that it cannot hold it anymore. She didn't know I was there. I stood in that hallway and watched her press the tips of her fingers against her closed eyes and take one slow breath and then another, putting herself back together piece by piece with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this before. Then she dropped her hands, straightened her shoulders, and walked back into the party like nothing had happened. Warm smile, easy laugh, the perfect picture of a woman completely in control of her world. I stood in that hallway alone, and something moved in my chest that had never moved quite that way before. Not pity, not concern exactly. Something older and quieter than either of those things. Recognition. Like I was seeing her, really seeing her, for the very first time. And understanding, suddenly and completely, why there had always been a chair pulled out. I didn't say anything that night. I stepped back before she turned around, let her compose herself, watched her walk back into the noise and the warmth and the easy laughter of a party that had no idea what had just happened in the hallway. But I had seen it, and I could not unsee it. I started paying attention after that. The way you start noticing something everywhere once you've noticed it once. The way her smile changed, or rather, didn't change when her husband walked into a room. Not lighting up, not shifting, staying exactly, carefully, deliberately the same. The practiced neutrality of someone who had taught themselves to feel nothing in public and had gotten very good at the lesson. The way she listened when I talked, not politely, not the way people listen when they're composing their next sentence while you're still finishing yours, fully, completely, like what I was saying was the only conversation happening in the world. The way she remembered things. I mentioned once, 9 months earlier, that I didn't take sugar in my coffee. She never put sugar in my coffee again. I mentioned once that I preferred sitting at the end of the table so I could stretch my legs. There was always an end seat waiting. She paid attention to me in a way that nobody in that room paid attention to me. I drove home after that dinner and sat in my parked car and thought about a woman in a dark green dress pressing her fingers against her eyes in a hallway. And I thought, who is doing this for her? Who is paying attention to what she takes in her coffee? Who is saving her a seat? Because from everything I had spent the last 3 hours watching clearly for the first time, nobody was. She called me 3 weeks later. Not a group message, not through my dad. Her name on my phone. Personal, direct, at 8:40 on a Thursday night. "I'm sorry to call out of nowhere," she said. "I just needed to talk to someone who isn't part of everything." I was already looking for my keys. She was at a wine bar 2 miles from their house, sitting alone at a corner table when I walked in, her coat still on despite being inside, A glass of red wine sitting untouched in front of her like something she'd ordered just to have something to do with her hands. She looked up when she saw me. Something in her expression shifted. Relief. And underneath the relief, something else I didn't let myself look at directly yet.
I sat down across from her. "He forgot our anniversary," she said. Just that. The flat, factual delivery of someone who has finished all the feeling about something, and what remains is just its shape. 7 years. And when I reminded him, she stopped, looked at her glass. He said he'd been busy. I didn't fill the silence with anything. I just stayed in it with her. She talked for an hour. About the marriage, about what it felt like to be in a room with someone who used to know you and now looked through you like you were furniture he'd stopped noticing. About smiling at dinner parties. About going to bed in a house that felt like a waiting room for a life that was supposed to start eventually. And then she stopped, mid-sentence, looked at me across the table with those hazel eyes that were doing something complicated, and said, "I don't know why I called you." But the way she said it, slowly, carefully, like she was testing the words, told me she knew exactly why. And so did I. We sat there in that corner booth, with the city moving outside the window, and the wine she still hadn't touched between us, and something shifting quietly in the air that neither of us acknowledged out loud. But we both felt it. And we both knew that the next time she needed to call someone who wasn't part of everything, she was going to call me again. She started texting after the wine bar. Small things at first. An article she thought I'd find interesting. A question about something I'd mentioned months ago that she'd apparently been sitting with ever since. A photo of a book spine. "You'd like this," with no further explanation. I replied every time, within minutes, and tried not to think too hard about that. We never discussed the wine bar. Never named what the wine bar had been. We just talked. The way two people talk when they found something rare and are both treating it gently with both hands. Then she asked if I wanted to see an art exhibition downtown. Her husband was away for the weekend. She had 2 tickets. Her sister had canceled. I said yes before she finished the sentence.
We spent 3 hours in that gallery, moving slowly, standing in front of things longer than you're supposed to. The conversation ranging across everything and nothing. Books, childhood, the particular loneliness of being in a crowded room and feeling like the only person in it. At one point, we were standing in front of a large canvas. 2 figures painted close together, suspended in some unnamed in-between moment, neither moving toward nor away from the other. She said quietly, almost to herself, "Some things are more powerful for never happening." I turned to look at her. She was already looking at me.
We were standing close enough. The gallery moved around us at its own pace, other people passing through their own afternoons. Her eyes dropped to my mouth for exactly 1 second. 1 second that I felt in my entire body. Then she looked back at the painting. "We should find the next room," she said. Her voice was completely steady. I followed her through the doorway and spent the next hour pretending my heart wasn't doing what it was doing. But I knew, and she knew, and the painting of 2 figures suspended in the space between staying and leaving was going to stay with me for a very long time.
The dinner was my dad's birthday. The whole group together, the usual crowd that had been gathering around the same tables for 20 years, filling the same rooms with the same comfortable noise. I arrived early to help set up. The house was quiet still, just my dad and Richard in the living room, music low somewhere. Elena wasn't downstairs yet.
I was in the kitchen opening wine when I heard her on the stairs, heels on hardwood, a particular sound, and I turned around. She was wearing a deep red dress, fitted through the waist, simple neckline, the kind of dress that doesn't try too hard and stops the room anyway. She saw me before she saw anyone else in the house, and she paused on the last step, just for a moment, half a second, long enough. Her expression moved through something complicated, warm, and careful, and underneath both of those things, something she covered quickly with a smile. "You're early," she said. "I came to help." She moved past me into the kitchen, close enough, deliberately or not, I was no longer sure, that I caught her perfume as she passed. Warm, quiet, the kind of scent that stays with you after the person has moved to the other side of the room.
She took wine glasses from the cabinet, arranged them on the tray, moved through her kitchen with the easy confidence of a woman completely comfortable in her own body. And then she glanced back, caught me watching her, held the look for one full second, then turned back to the glasses without saying a word. Neither of us said anything, but the kitchen felt about 10 degrees warmer than it had 60 seconds ago. And we both knew it.
Her husband's name was Richard. I had known him my whole life in the way you know the furniture of a house. Present, unremarkable, simply occupying space. He wasn't a bad man. My dad liked him. He was successful and well-dressed and said the right things at the right moments, with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for so long it no longer required any actual thought. I watched him that birthday dinner. Really watched him. He sat at the head of the table and dominated the conversation effortlessly. Business, travel, the easy currency of men who are used to being listened to. He was charming. I could see what he must have been once. He refilled his own glass 3 times. He never refilled Elena's. She didn't ask. She reached for the bottle herself, quietly, without making anything of it. He didn't notice. She said something at one point, a small, sharp observation about something she'd read recently, the kind of comment that would have opened a conversation wide open if anyone had picked it up. It was genuinely interesting. I almost responded from across the table. Richard smiled without looking at her and continued his existing conversation. She folded it away, took a sip of wine, let her eyes drift across the table.
Found me. I hadn't looked away in time. So we held it, across a table of 12 people, in the middle of a dinner party, her husband 18 inches to her left. We looked at each other, with everything that had been accumulating for months. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then my dad made a toast, and glasses were raised, and the moment broke like something fragile that had been balanced perfectly and then wasn't. But I felt it for the rest of the evening like a hand pressed against my chest. And I think she did too. She called at 11:15 on a Wednesday. The rain had been going for hours. I was still awake. I always was late. And her name on my screen at that hour landed somewhere in me like something I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. "Are you home?" she said. "Yes." A pause. "Can I come over?" 20 minutes later, she was at my door. No coat despite the rain. The ends of her dark hair damp against her collarbone. The look of someone who had left before fully deciding to leave. I stepped back. She walked past me into the apartment. Stood in the middle of my living room. Looked around like she was orienting herself. Then turned to face me. I told him I want a separation. I closed the door. What did he say? He asked if there was someone else. She laughed, a short sound with no humor in it. I said no. She looked at me steadily, which is technically true. The rain hit the windows. The apartment was warm. She was standing 3 feet away, looking at me,
with an expression that had stopped pretending to be anything other than what it was.
"Elena." "I know," she said, quietly, not defensive. "I know what I'm doing here at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday. I know what this is." She looked down for a moment, then back up. "I just needed to be somewhere that felt honest for 5 minutes." I crossed the room, stopped in front of her. Close enough that she had to look up slightly. Close enough that I could see her breath change just slightly. "You don't have to go," I said. She looked at me for a long time. Then she sat down on my couch, pulled her knees up, and looked at me like someone who had just put something very heavy down. "Tell me something true," she said. So I sat down across from her. And I did. We talked until 2 in the morning. Not about Richard. Not about separations or consequences or what happened next to people who found themselves here. About everything else. Who we actually were underneath the roles we'd been playing. What I wanted from my life and what she'd stopped letting herself want from hers. What it felt like to be truly known by someone. What it felt like to go years without it. The rain stopped somewhere around midnight. The lamp on the side table became the only light in the world. She had the blanket around her shoulders. Her shoes were off. Her hair had dried loose around her face. She looked more like herself than I had ever seen her look. Unhurried, unarmored, all the careful composure she wore in every room she walked into, simply not present. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yes. I have been saving you a seat at every table for 4 years. She said it plainly, like something she had rehearsed and was now simply delivering. Not because of your father, not out of politeness. Because the room felt different when you were in it. Because you are the only person in all of those years and all of those dinners who ever looked at me like I was someone worth looking at." The apartment was completely quiet. "I know how that sounds," she said. "It sounds like the truest thing anyone has ever said to me," I said. She looked at me for a long moment with those hazel eyes that weren't performing anything at all. Then she unfolded herself from her end of the couch and crossed the space between us and sat beside me, her shoulder against mine, warm and real. Her head tilted until it rested against my shoulder. A small exhale, like something held tight for a very long time, finally, carefully letting go. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Her hand found mine in the space between us. Her fingers laced through mine slowly, like a question being asked one word at a time. I answered by holding on. She fell asleep on my couch. I don't think she meant to. Her voice had been getting quieter and slower for a while, the particular cadence of someone who is finally safe enough to be tired. And then it simply stopped. I sat there for a long time in the quiet. Her hand had loosened in mine, but hadn't let go. Her breathing had settled into the slow rhythm of someone genuinely asleep for the first time in a while. Eventually, I got the good blanket from my bedroom and laid it over her without waking her. She made a small sound and pulled it tighter. I turned the lamp down low. Then I went to the kitchen and stood at the window and looked at the wet, empty street below and thought about everything. Everything she had said, everything I had said back, the weight of her head on my shoulder and her hand in mine, and the specific way she had looked at me when she said, "You are the only person who ever looked at me like I was worth looking at." And then I thought about my dad, his best friend, 20 years of friendship. The table I had been welcomed to my whole life, and the woman who had always made sure there was a chair waiting. I stood at that window for a long time. The sky was going gray at the edges when I heard her behind me. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, blanket around her shoulders, hair loose and slightly tangled from sleep. The particular vulnerability of someone seen in the early morning before they've had the chance to put anything back in place. "I have to go," she said softly. "I know." She crossed the kitchen slowly, stopped in front of me, very close. She looked up at me and then placed her palm flat against my chest, over my heart, and held it there. Warm, still, feeling what was happening beneath it. "This is real," she said. "Not a question, a confirmation." "Yes," I said. She nodded, took her hand back, and at the door she turned around one last time, the look of someone who has found something they don't know how to keep and cannot imagine losing.
3 days of silence. Not cold, not angry, just the silence of two people who have said something true and are now living in the weight of it. She texted on the 4th day. One line. I can't stop thinking about that night. I stared at my phone for 10 minutes before I typed back. Neither can I. What followed was not a decision made cleanly or quickly. It was a series of conversations over 2 weeks, in texts and one phone call that lasted 2 hours, about what was real and what was possible, and what the difference between those two things was going to cost. She was still in the house. The separation conversation had happened once and then been left there, unfinished, because Richard had a work trip and she'd needed time, and the house was easier to leave in theory than in practice. I drove past their street twice without stopping. I thought about my dad constantly. His voice at the birthday dinner, making a toast. His hand on Richard's shoulder at every table they'd ever shared. 20 years of friendship that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with what I was feeling.
I thought about Elena in a dark green dress, crying in a hallway. I thought about her hand over my heart at 5 in the morning. I thought about all the seats she had saved and all the years I hadn't understood, and how it was possible to be inside a story for so long without seeing what story it was. On a Sunday evening, she called. "I told him I want to move out," she said. "I found an apartment. I'm viewing it Thursday." I sat down. "Are you sure?" A pause. Then, "I've been sure for longer than I let myself admit. The question I keep sitting with isn't about Richard. It's whether this, what we've been. I need to know if this is real, Jake. Not the apartment, not the separation. This." "It's real," I said. No hesitation, no qualification. Just that. She exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said. "Okay."
She moved into the apartment on a Saturday in March. I helped carry boxes. Her sister was there. It was practical and slightly chaotic, and nobody talked about what it meant. We just moved boxes from the van to the elevator to the rooms and drank coffee from paper cups. And by 4 in the afternoon, there was a life beginning to take shape in an empty space. Her sister left at 6. I stayed. We ordered food and sat on the floor of her half-furnished living room because the couch hadn't arrived yet, and ate from the containers and talked about nothing important for a while. Where the bookshelves should go, whether the bedroom window got morning light. Small logistical things that were actually just both of us breathing normally for the first time in weeks. At some point, the food containers were empty, and the room had gotten dark outside, and neither of us had turned a light on. And we were just sitting there, in the last of the natural light coming through her new windows. She was looking at me. I've wanted to tell you something for a long time, she said. Tell me.
I knew the first time you sat in that chair next to me that you were going to matter. She said it simply. No performance, no armor. I didn't understand what kind of mattering, but I knew. She paused. I just kept saving the seat because it was the only honest thing I could do. I reached across and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She went very still. My hand stayed at her jaw for a moment. Warm, deliberate. Nothing rushed. She leaned into it slightly, just slightly, her eyes closing for 1 second. Then she opened them and looked at me. And the last of the complicated distance between us simply wasn't there anymore.
I think about that first dinner sometimes. 26 years old. Walking through a door I'd walked through 100 times. Finding a chair already pulled out beside a woman who looked up at me with a quiet smile, like she'd been expecting me. I sat down without thinking. The way you take the path that's already been cleared. I understand now what she was doing. What she had been doing every single time for 4 years without either of us naming it. Keeping a space open. Holding something carefully that she wasn't ready to put down and wasn't allowed to pick up.
She's asleep in the other room as I write this. Her apartment is starting to look like her. Books on the shelves, a plant on the windowsill, the particular warmth of a space that belongs to someone who knows how to make things feel like home. We are not without complications. My dad doesn't know yet. Richard is dealing with things in his own way, and some of that is difficult, and none of it is simple. But I have learned something in the past year that I think I will carry for the rest of my life.